And I should have included the introduction, but my apologies. But Tal Smith, thank you so much for joining us. It's a real thrill to have you, in our winter meetings. Again, the brainchild of Bill Gilbert. We've had former players, we've had current players, we've had umpires, we've had journalists, writers, historians, and it's a real honor to have Tal Smith with us today. So thank you, Tal, for joining us today.
Well, thank you, Gilbert. It's a real pleasure to be here. I'm sorry that we're unable to meet live in San Marcos. I was looking forward to that, and as my friend and fellow Sabre member, and I hope my chauffeur, Mike McCroskey, was looking forward to having a nice barbecue lunch after the session in San Marcos. Well, we'll have to put that aside. I've been on the call since 9 o'clock this morning. I've really enjoyed it. I thought Jim Baker's icebreaker with Rob Nyer, that was a good opening act. And as a one-time stamp collector in my early youth, I enjoyed Dan Walsh's presentation. I was particularly interested early on in the back and forth, the conversation, the discussion by many of the members on here about various things, particularly the lockout and Carlos Correa and other things. That's one thing that makes Sabre and baseball in itself so interesting. There's so many different topics, so many different subjects, and I don't have any script or prepared agenda this morning. I've got a few remarks I'll make, and then I thought it would probably serve best if I just did Q&A and was able to discuss what you'd like to talk about. Recognize the individual interests. As Gilbert said in his opening around 9 o'clock this morning, it's a rainy day. It's been cold throughout the region for a couple of days prior to today, and kind of miserable weather. It makes you long for spring training and for baseball. Last night, for a few minutes, I turned on the MLB channel and saw again part of Ken Burns's great documentary on the history of baseball. I've seen it many times, but I always enjoy it. It always rekindles your love of the game, particularly on a cold, rainy night. Normally would be about 5 or 6 weeks away from from those magical words, pitchers and catchers report. The first Grapefruit League game actually is scheduled for February the 26th. That's 49 days, or exactly 7 weeks from today. Opening day is scheduled for March 31. That would be 82 days. Seems like a long wait, but one that we really look forward to. Of course, all this is dependent on the owners and the players reaching an agreement on a new collective bargaining agreement and ending the lockout. There was a lot of discussion early on this call about that, and I know there's a number of different viewpoints. I'll just throw in my 2 cents worth, so to speak. I think I have a more optimistic viewpoint. I think we have to recognize that on both sides, these are skilled negotiators. They understand and they realize the stakes. They spend hours and days planning and plotting their strategy as to what their next offer will be, what kind of a response they think that will elicit from the other side, and then what their next counter move could be. This is something they give a great deal of thought to, and I think sometimes we're misled by some of the rhetoric and the public posturing that we see. That obviously it's the media's job to try to report on what's going on and to keep us informed. But I'm not sure anybody outside of the principals involved in this and their board of directors, so to speak. I'm not sure anybody is really privy to what the various positions may be. That stands aside from the public rhetoric. And the rhetoric is designed and in a sense to gain public support uh, and perhaps to create leverage, although I really don't think it does, because I think the skilled negotiators are well beyond that point. My only concern is I think it's necessary for the principals to put their egos aside. It is a competitive match, and you have to abandon any notion or goal of seeking unconditional surrender from the other side. If that's your goal, we're not going to have a settlement. And I think they recognize that. I think the parties know what's at stake. As some have pointed out, it's the first time most of these players have gone through this, but I think they understand if there's a lockout or if there's no settlement, they don't get to play, they don't get paid, and that's a great sacrifice. This is their occupation. They've been competitive athletes since their early years, and that's what they want to do, and obviously it's what they get paid to do. Putting their comments aside, I think every player's goal is to get back on the field as soon as possible, obviously with what they hope is a fair and reasonable settlement, and they have to leave that in the hands of their negotiators and their board of directors. By the same token, the owners recognize what's at stake. If they don't play, obviously there's no revenue. There is rent to be paid. There's other expenses that they have to, and for the most part, when they're in the game, not only for the financial benefits perhaps, but more importantly, because they like the game, enjoy the game, and the attention that it brings. So from that standpoint, even though there's a number of issues that have to be resolved, I've put together just quickly the things that I can think of that have to be on the table, and not necessarily in any order. But you've got the question of expanded playoffs, which the club owners certainly want, and it has some benefit to the players too. The more teams in the playoffs, the more opportunity there is for players to get there and to enjoy the rewards. You've got the DH to consider. You've got other rule changes that are somewhat tied to the so-called pace of the game. You've got the competitive balance issue, which again I think is sometimes misrepresented, but obviously the players make a case for this, because if they can encourage every club to be more competitive, then obviously that presumably would result in more money being spent on player salaries. You've got service time manipulation that we've lived through for several years now, and I'm not sure that ever goes away, because any time where you've got some kind of an emphasis on years or days or something, it's to the advantage of the clubs to get maximum benefit from those rules and those computations. You got luxury tax issue, revenue sharing, the compensation in the form of amateur draft choices for free agents that stand to leave your club. You've got eligibility for salary arbitration. Is that going to be expanded? You've got the minimum salary. That'll certainly be an issue that'll be addressed and taken care of. And then you've got a big question about what is a means of fair compensation for the young stars in the game in their first or second year who are not yet eligible for salary arbitration. So those are some of the issues that are on the table. I frankly prefer to take an optimistic viewpoint and think the stakes are so great and the awareness is there that the parties will will ultimately find a way. It'll probably go down to the wire because that maximizes their leverage. But I am optimistic that we'll have spring training and we'll have a 2022 playing season. I've probably expanded on that enough, and I know you've got other issues you'd like to hear about. So if it's all right with Gilbert and your moderators, I'll open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, Tal, thank you so much for that insight. I mean, you provide, your experience as a baseball executive and, with the Astros, with the major league team, but also with your business, with the salary arbitration, gives you a special insight into kind of what's going on. And I appreciate your optimism. We need more of that, in today's world, certainly. And I certainly hope that they can resolve things so that we can get back to talking about, who the Astros are going to have playing shortstop, this coming season, and who's going to win the West and who's going to win the World Series and so forth. But let me just ask, you had multiple stints with the Astros organization. You were there from the very beginning with the Colt 45s. You returned to the Astros on multiple occasions. You also built that successful business with salary arbitration. But tell me how you got on this path. I mean, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronaut. I wanted to be a baseball player. And I don't know, did you have a moment where you said, I want to be a baseball executive? I mean, was the path clear for you, or how did that happen for you?
Yeah, from the time I was 7 years old, I was just captivated by baseball. It became my aspiration. I followed all sports, but baseball in particular. Obviously, you like to think that you're talented enough to make it as a player, but you soon realize that's only for the chosen few, so to speak. And I started turning my attention to other things. When I was in college at Duke, I became active in the campus radio station and broadcast basketball and baseball and some football. And I did that for 3 years, and we actually developed a following there that's particularly in basketball, that we started feeding commercial stations with our broadcast. Why not? I'll just throw in as an aside, Dave Hartman, who some of you may recall is a very prominent actor, and Walnut was my partner on that. I did the play-by-play, and Dave served as the analyst, and so on. Anyway, he went on to a great movie career and broadcasting career with saying Good Morning America, as I recall, and one of the Virginian and certain other things. But that's just an aside. While I was still at Duke, again, I everything I did, I tried to focus on baseball. Summer employment, I sent out a lot of letters, and one night, and I came back to my dorm one day during exam period, and there was a telegram from J.G. Taylor Spink at the Sporting News in response to a letter I had written. And make a long story short, I got on the phone, we had a discussion, and he offered me a summer job at the Sporting News in St. Louis, which at that time, as most of you know, was a baseball Bible, far different from what it became in later years. It concentrated solely on baseball. That was a great experience for me, around a lot of very experienced journalists. Cliff Cackline, one of the early founders of SABR, who was on the editorial staff, and many others. But that was a great experience, and also gave me something on a resume. I mean, so when you're in college, you don't have an awful lot of things you can really point to. I could point to my radio work, and I could point to summer employment with the Sporting News. So after Duke, I had a service commitment, 2 years in the Air Force, and as it came close for my tour to be completed, my fellow officers were planning to join their father's business or Fortune 500 companies or something. They kept asking me what I was going to do, and I said, I hope to get a job in baseball. And that time they really scoffed at it. But since I persisted, I wrote all 16 clubs at that time. I got various responses. Some of the responses I got after I was actually employed, but it's stand by the. Make a long story short, one of the letters I got was from Gabe Paul at Cincinnati, and it was just opened the door enough where I could follow up and arrange to come to Cincinnati the day after I got out of the service. My wife and I drove from Cape Cod. I was stationed at Otis Air Force Base there, and we drove from the Cape to Cincinnati. And one night, I had an appointment, but not a specific time. And I remember sitting in the Reds small offices at that time and watching it was in May, and the club was on the road, and I watched the employees leave one by one, and finally was ushered into Gabe's office, first time I've been in a major league office, obviously in awe. He asked about skills. Well, again, with the exception of the radio and sporting news, I didn't have a lot to offer. He asked about typing, and I said yes. I thought I was a pretty good typist. I'd learned myself and had taken some courses in high school. I was editor of the school paper and so on. Stands in those days, you had pretty much type your own term paper or pay somebody else to do it. Well, so I felt comfortable answering yes. I was a pretty good typist. He asked about shorthand, and I laughed and I said no, that wasn't part of the curriculum at Culver, where went to high school, military academy, or at Duke. And he proceeded to tell me stories about how that might be a successful road for somebody, because in those days, women secretaries or other female employees generally didn't travel. This is in the 1950s. And Gabe was pointing out how that would have been useful to him at various major league meetings and so on if he had somebody he could rely on to help take notes and so on and so forth. So that was enough of an opening that encouraged me to go back to Durham, North Carolina, where Duke is, and where that's my wife's home, and my parents were living there at the time. And I enrolled in the Croft Business School, which is a business school primarily for young high school grads that aspire to secretarial careers. They offered a course in speed writing, which at that time was sort of like Berlitz was to language, and they professed that you could learn this in 6 weeks or so. Well, I would have done anything to pursue my ambition to get a job in baseball, and particularly with the meeting I'd had with Gabe. So I enrolled in that. Got the administrators of the school to write a letter to Gabe telling him about my progress and so on. The course completed. I felt I was proficient, but still nothing materialized with the Reds, so it was time to seek employment. I didn't want to close the door on baseball. I was born in Massachusetts, loved Cape Cod, where we were stationed on the Air Force, and figured, well, if we have to do something, that would be a great place to do it. So I contacted the radio station and the newspaper there, and was conditionally hired over the phone by the managing editor of the New Bedford and Cape Cod Standard Times. And I went back there and took a job with the paper. The one concern was that so many college grads were inclined to use that as a stepping stone to the Boston Globe or the Boston Traveler or the New York Times or what have you. And I assured him that was not my interest. Fortunately, the managing editor, Mr. Rogers, did not ask me if I was if I was inclined to pursue a career in baseball, and I didn't feel obligated to bring that up. And then, frankly, I didn't know what was going to happen. So anyway, I went to work for the newspaper. Where we were living was only a short distance from the paper. And came over for lunch one day, and my wife, and the mail had arrived. And there was a letter from Gabe, just very brief one, that said about a possibility of an opening. And I picked up the phone and discussed it with Gabe, and negotiated my salary back up to what I was making with the newspaper, which was $75 a week, and went back and gave notice, and they were most unhappy. But I think stood, but they weren't very pleased. I'd been there 2 months, and now they had to go find another replacement that would probably be inclined to use it as a stepping stone for something else. So anyway, that started my career in Cincinnati. That's a long answer to your question. I'm sorry.
No. That's fascinating, and it really, as a former high school and college newspaper editor. It warms my heart to hear about your start in journalism and broadcasting and campus radio. Really, really cool to hear that. And I do want to open it up to questions from the group, but Tal, let me ask you this question. You've had the opportunity to work at the highest levels in a baseball office, and obviously the relationship with the owner is really something between a general manager and an owner. And you've worked with different owners and you've had different experiences, but can you share some insight with the group about what that relationship is like? Because from the outside, it looks like when it's working well, it can be a great team that can really lift a team. It could lift a community. It could lift a whole state. But we also know that the owner doesn't always agree, and sometimes the general manager or the president of baseball operations doesn't agree, and there's a little bit of tension. So, not asking to name names, but if you could just give us some insight, into what that relationship is like, and what were some of the challenges, and how did you overcome some of those challenges in working with owners?
I'm not sure I did. Yeah, it really varies. Just like in any walk of life, it stands to try to categorize owners. There's a vast difference in personalities and background and so on. Just very quickly, for example, at Cincinnati, when I was there, Powell Crosley was the owner. We saw him twice a year at the Christmas luncheon. And the only other time he would make one appearance during the season. By this time he was retired, from Crosley, from the refrigerators and radios and everything else they did. And he lived off the coast of South Carolina, as I recall, on Bull Island. And his hobby was in raising what I recall as Sardinian donkeys. And the one thing the club had to do was once a year they had to at some fan celebration. They didn't have Fan Fest in those days, but they had various times a year where they would have something going on for the fans and with prizes and so on. And Mr. Crosley wanted to make sure that the club gave away, I think it was 3 Sardinian donkeys. I don't know who wanted them or why, but that, as I said, that was our only other exposure other than a very formal, sedate Christmas luncheon for the employees at the hotel. Obviously, I came to Houston, far different scene with Roy Hoffheinz and Bob Smith and George Kirksey and Craig Cullinan, one of the, a real dynamic ownership group and very, very active and very hands-on. Gabe Paul, as most of you know, had come from Cincinnati to Houston as the first general manager, invited me to come along with him. And when Gabe had complete autonomy in Cincinnati because Mr. Crosley was never around. The entire operation was Gabe's responsibility, and I presume from time to time maybe he had to answer a phone call or so, but I don't think it was very frequent. I mean, Gabe really, in fact, as I said, had autonomy and was in fact the acted as the owner. He came to Houston and sort of expected the same thing. Well, obviously that's not Hoffheinz's nature, and as most of you know, after I can recall meeting, I'd go to lunch with Gabe frequently here in Houston, almost daily, and saying we had developed a close relationship, and he would confide in me, and he says, "Tal, this isn't what I bargained for, and why not?" With the Colt Stadium, which in 1961, as most of you know, the first year of the expansion franchise, the National League clubs, the Mets and the Colt 45s did not commence play until the following year. So we had 1961 to prepare. We had to acquire the territory and buy the Houston Buffs and operate them, and we were doing so out of Buff Stadium off of the Gulf Freeway, and Hoffheinz's flamboyancy and his theatrical air and so on. He wanted to dress up Colt Stadium, and he did. And he put pennants and painted it and everything else. I can recall Gabe coming back from a trip to spring training and saying, "This looks like a used car lot," and whatnot because of the pennants and so on. So anyway, my point is that Gabe and Hofheinz clashed over autonomy and who was going to make the decision. So Gabe pulled out and left. From that time on, the next owner I had was with the Yankees, a guy by the name of George Steinbrenner, and that was interesting, and whatnot. But I do have to support George. I got along with him fine. I understood. I mean, he could be very, very temperamental and whatnot. But I think underneath it all, he had a good heart. And you had to, much like I said about labor negotiations, you have to get beyond the rhetoric and some of the newspaper and headlines and so on. I actually enjoyed working for George. I thought the club made progress. Sometimes you had some heated arguments, but that's okay as long as you come out with the right decision and all is forgiven afterwards. And that's the way George was. I had a number of battles with him after I came back to Houston. We ended up in the commissioner's office and in hearings over 2 or 3 different disputes. And I can recall George and the American League attorneys and Yankee attorneys being at one end of the table, and I'd be at the other. And I have a tendency to get emphatic when I'm trying to make a point or an argument, and why not? I pounded the table a couple of times, and George would finally, from the other end of the table, he says, "Damn it, Tal, you don't have to yell at me." And with that, he broke out in a grin, and we settled whatever the differences were, and so on. And I found that's the way George was. I found I could work with George. That wasn't typical of the subsequent owners I worked for. As I came back to Houston when it was under receivership, so to speak, with Ford Credit and GE Credit operating the club because they had the banknotes, they had the loans, and took over control of the board, and that was fine. I really enjoyed that. That was operated under that from the time I came back in August of '75 until McMullen bought the club in mid-season of '79. Working for Ford and GE was fine because it was handled in a corporate fashion. I understand that there'd be monthly meetings. I'd have to make presentations. I'd have to answer questions. I'd have to support my positions. And if I did, everything was fine. And that worked well. I thought we made a lot of progress. McMullen bought the club in mid-season '79, and that didn't work well. And I think primarily, and this is a characteristic, you got egos in the game. I talked about egos from a standpoint of the negotiators. They have to put the egos aside if they're going to reach agreement. It's not a question of who's going to win. It's a question of being able to reach settlement to affect this. So as it stands, unfortunately, from the standpoint of my relationship with McMullen in '79, the club did very well. We and the Reds outplayed us down the stretch, and we finished second by a game and a half, but still it was great progress. 1980, we delivered the first divisional championship to Houston, the memorable 5-game LCS with the Phillies, and so on. But again, there was a lot of it stands a lot of acclaim and a lot of fans and media were generally happy. Bill Verdon was named manager of the year. I was named executive of the year. But those are the kind of things that really sometimes can upset somebody else from an ego standpoint. I know I can recall distinctly going to a meeting that McMullen had arranged pregame. Stands with a group of prominent or distinguished people. It was actually I'm not going to name the group because I may be wrong, but it was a meeting pregame, and when he wanted Bill Verdon to make an appearance, Bill was in uniform because it was pregame, but he came upstairs to what used to be Hofheinz's suite. Bill was in uniform, obviously, and as soon as he walks in the room, obviously the people in attendance, they gravitate to Bill. here's a big league manager. This is the guy we want to talk about. That's why we were at the ball game. And so Bill had to leave, and then we had a dinner and remarks afterwards. And Stan McMullen spoke first, and then asked me to speak. And I always tried to be considerate and understanding of the position. I understood the relative roles and the egos, and I don't think I ever deliberately tried to overplay my hand or my role. But obviously the Q&As, the questions came to me about the farm system, or who's going to play shortstop, or who's going to do this, and so on and so forth. And afterwards, I got reports that McMullen was incensed about my performance. I'm sorry, I can't help that, but I think that's what ultimately led to my departure. I think we were too successful. If we'd been a third place club, I suspect I would have continued to be employed.
Wow. Wow, that's quite a, I mean, that's quite a range, right? I mean, the kind of owners that you've worked with, and you know, it's like for some people, that might be your exit from baseball, you know, and you know, you don't strike me as that kind of person that said, oh well, I guess I'm going to retire in the sunset, and that's the last you'll hear from Tal Smith. You know, that you pivoted and, you know, and did something, you know, quite remarkable in creating this business, staying involved in baseball. And you know, I want to ask this question before I open it up to the group, but can you share a little bit of insight in working with Bill Gilbert? Maybe you have some Bill Gilbert stories, you know, maybe there's something you could tell us about your relationship with him, about what he did. I mean, we know Bill from the Sabre baseball side. You know, he was a great friend and colleague, and you know, we loved him dearly. But you got to work with him, you know, in a professional level, in crunching numbers, in evaluating talent, in making arguments. I'm wondering if you could just share a little bit about that and your arbitration business.
Yeah, certainly. I really miss Bill, as you said, as a friend and as a colleague. I started my consulting business in 1981, and it grew over the years. We did a lot of things. Salary arbitration became the most visible because that's something the media could relate to, but we did a lot of other things. We did a lot of financial appraisals. I think I appraised the player personnel and other baseball assets of major league clubs on something like 30 occasions, whenever there was a sale or transfer of assets and so on, and you have to allocate the asset value. I did a lot of that. I did evaluations of scouting and player development systems. I would do one a year, or I would do more, do no more than one a year. But I did that for Baltimore and the Red Sox and the Padres and Cleveland and several clubs and the Yankees at various times. And then we served as expert witness in litigation and so on. There were a lot of different things we did. We did some executive search work on behalf of clubs and helping them find scouting directors, farm directors, even field managers. We didn't make the decisions, but we were asked to become involved and so on. So anyway, over the years, I had to expand the staff from 1981 on, and there was in the early years, or for the most part, I didn't hire anybody from within baseball until Ed Wade, and after 5 or 6 years, Ed was at Pittsburgh. He had started with the Astros as our PR director, and after I left at the end of '80, he went on to Pittsburgh as PR director, and he was anxious to further his career, and we'd stayed in touch. And I hired him in the mid '80s as a full-time employee. For salary arbitration, most of our staff was seasonal, and at the highlight, we represented 13 clubs at one time, and that's a lot of work, and I had to put together a staff of 10 people. Bill Gilbert, I forget the initial contact. I think Bill he may have called me with his interest in baseball. And I think at that time he was certainly doing some baseball writing and research and so on. And one thing led to another, and we met. And I was impressed with his background. He had the time. This was I want to say 1994 when we added Bill to the staff on a seasonal basis, and with whatever time he had. And at that time, I think he was still employed, but he had weekends and nights free and would take a leave of absence when we went on the road. And that was always a 3 to 4 week trip. And Bill was very instrumental in a lot of our research. Obviously, at one point, this was before Bill, but and the highlight of our workload was 1986. We had 96 arbitration cases that were filed and actually went to hearings on 25 of them. That's a full load. I really think at that time that the union was trying to see if they could break us with the volume, if they would get us to a point where we were just unable to handle it. And that didn't happen. It was a real test, but we got through it well, I thought. But so it's then the workload, and years after that, the number of cases, there were more settlements and fewer cases we had to prepare. Bill was very good in helping us develop various position papers. One that comes to mind, I thought it was always difficult in the early years. One of the most difficult things to evaluate, I thought was a category of relief pitchers, because they serve different roles. There should be a difference in the value of a setup guy to a mop-up guy to a closer, so on. And so as Bill and I talked about it, and he really was instrumental in doing the research and coming up with the numbers to where we could divide the relief pitcher category into, I think we had obviously the left-handed relief specialist, the setup guy, the closer, the mop-up guy, the spot starter, so on. And obviously, it's time to categorize these things, and to make an argument, you had to have the numbers to back it up. So that involved doing a lot of research over the years as to how many innings and how many saves and how many holes and how many games finished and all this and that. That was one of the more instrumental papers and positions that Bill really helped with. We also tried to categorize things from an offensive standpoint, trying to wrap it into one number as sabermetrics and Bill James and many others have subsequently done. And we had our own formulas there. We didn't attach weights to it. We just tried to take it all into consideration and whatnot. So Bill was very instrumental. Yeah, I think he really enjoyed the salary arbitration process, what the competition, the arguments that could be developed, and so on. And he was a real asset and became a very dear friend.
Thank you so much for sharing that. We, like you, we miss him very much, but love hearing kind of that insight about working with Bill and what he did, and really how it kind of predated, right, some of the sabermetrics type stuff, and the progress, right, that's been made in trying to evaluate players with statistics and understanding the game in a different way. I really would like to open it up to the group now for questions. If you have a question, you can use the Zoom option to raise your hand, or if you wave, I can try to spot you and call on you. So anyone have a question here for Tal Smith? Yes, Mike, please. Mike McCroskey.
That's trouble.
I just needed to unmute.
Yes.
Tal, I've got a question I thought about while you were talking. I knew you had started in Cincinnati. And when I used to watch the game of the week, they were the only club in the majors that I knew of that had the inclined warning track. I guess there could have been others before that, but that would have been in the 50s when Dizzy Dean was doing them. And I was always kind of interested in that. And then you took it to Minute Maid Park. I would assume from your relationship, you had seen it at Cincinnati, so maybe it was nostalgic when you did it. But then I also got to thinking, you got to work on the Astrodome, because you've told me that's why Hofheinz kept you and put you in charge. You were a young guy about 30 and kind of supervised and were the liaison for building the Astrodome. And then you obviously had some influence on Minute Maid Park with the inclusion of Towles Hill. So my question is, did you learn anything building the Astrodome that helped you when Minute Maid Park got constructed?
Yeah, obviously, Sam, when I was involved in the Astrodome, that was a completely new experience. When Hofheinz, when Judge Hofheinz called me into his office, I was going to leave. I was on my way to Cleveland, and I was good in a player personnel role up there, and I was really in the office to check out and say my goodbyes. And this was a temporary office. We had a cold stadium. Hofheinz heard my voice and called me into his office, and he said, he said, I understand why you're leaving. I'm sorry for the circumstances. I'd really like you to stay. And he said, what he had in mind was to serve as a liaison or project manager for the club with the Astrodome. And I said, well, Judge, that's very kind of you. I don't have any. I haven't got any background in engineer or architecture. I said my interest in baseball has been on the player personnel side. And he said, I understand that, but I've seen, anyway, he went on to give me his analysis of what he thought I could do and so on. So I called Gabe Paul in Cleveland and told him of this, and Gabe and Hofheinz were obviously not on a good relationship given their history, but Gabe thought it was a remarkable opportunity, and said I may not like the judge, but I respect him, and I think this is really unique, and it's a great compliment to you that he even asked you. So anyway, make a long story short, I stayed and tried to learn as much as I could. I remember a few days later, my office was flooded with the drawings and blueprints and specifications and so on, and I spent over 2 years on that project, and then obviously when Drayton McLean and the Astros were in the midst of negotiating and designing what is today Minute Maid Park, Drayton asked, had me stands attend most of the meetings and asked my input. And the one thing Drayton was concerned about after the basic footprint was decided. I mean, you got so much land to work with and so on, and we discussed the seating capacity and how many levels to the seating bowl and so on. And then Drayton said, Tal, what can we do to make the ballpark distinctive or unique? And so I just told him my recollection and my knowledge of baseball history and whatnot. Obviously, the vines at Wrigley and the Green Monster at Fenway and the monuments which were in play at that time at Yankee Stadium. And then I talked about some of the other features, and I talked about Crosley Field. It had an incline that when I joined the Reds in 1958, Frank Robinson was patrolling left field and would have to run up this incline to corral fly balls and so on. And I knew from a historical standpoint, I've always been interested and studied and read a lot about the game, and I was aware that the first such real incline was at Fenway Park. It was called Duffy's Cliff after Duffy Lewis, who was a Red Sox left fielder with Tris Speaker and Harry Hooper. And the architects and designers were in this meeting, and we just sort of kicked things around, and a few of them, including Drayton, sort of liked my idea about the hill, and so in some of the preliminary drawings, they put that in there. I really didn't think it would survive. It was just an idea I had to make a park a little bit distinctive and different, and when they liked it, and that's what developed. And when we got some criticism, I know about the flagpole was in play in deep center field, and I didn't make a point to mention this to anybody at MLB. They hadn't asked, but just before we moved into the stadium, they wanted to see the final plans or so on, and I got a call from MLB. It was from Katie Feeney, who had a key administrative role, and she says, "Tal, do you realize this? And the flagpole's in play. We can't have that." And I said, "Katie, have you been to Tiger Stadium?" Because at Tiger Stadium at that time, the flagpole was in play there. It had been in play in many major league ballparks, and obviously we padded it well. It's never been an issue. Nobody's ever been injured on that. Nobody's been injured on the hill. I see more people trip over the pitcher's mound trying to catch pop-ups, or when they used to have bullpens, it stands in foul territory beyond first and third base. That was more of a hindrance, I think, than Tal's Hill ever was.
I have a question. Who came up with the idea to put a bowling alley in the Astrodome?
That was Judge Hoffheinz. From his standpoint, as I said, he had a great flair for theatrics. His own homes were very interesting with different themes and whatnot. And he had a home down in LaPorte at the Bay. Everything decorated. At heart, he was a circus master, and he, later on actually bought the Ringling Brothers Barnum and Bailey Circus, and whatnot. But so from a standpoint, just like Drayton wanted to make the ballpark somewhat distinctive, Hoffheinz, though it didn't need it, he wanted to make the Astrodome. He wanted to make everything different in there. I mean, that's the and what the color array we had in the dome in the initial stages, the red and the coral and the blue and so on. That was all Hoffheinz. When I was working on the project, I'd go into his office and he'd have all these paint chips laid out in various combinations. What do you think of this? What do you think of that? He spent an incredible amount of time picking out. He would get as detailed as picking out the silverware for the Astrodome Club, send the seating, send the color arrangement for each level, and so on. That was all Hoffheinz, and I forget where I was leading with this now. Frankly, on the question, you want to bring me back to where we were?
He was asking about the bowling alley, but I think, yeah.
So the bowling alley and the chapel and all that was just all Hoffheinz. As I said, these are themes that not the exact same ones, but he had a circus room in his home at that time off of Yorktown in the Galleria area. He had various themes like that at his hunting lodge out in Katy, at his retreat down in LaPorte, and he wanted to do the same thing in Dome. He wanted people to talk about about the Dome, about every aspect of it, and he enjoyed creating these things. So he had the bowling alley. He had a room that was sort of like you'd find at a carnival or a circus. It was called the Tipsy Bar, where you'd walk in and you had the sense that the floor was uneven and the bar was sliding, and that's what led to the bowling alley and the chapel and all these other things. That was just Hoffheinz's flair.
That's terrific. That's terrific. Jim Baker's got a question, Tal.
Sure.
Tal, I love Tal's Hill. It was a thrill to go to a ballpark and see a hill. I immediately thought, well, this is what Duffy's Cliff was like. And I was angry when they got rid of it. What were your thoughts when they got rid of it?
I thought it was inevitable. Whenever you have a change in ownership or change in administration, there's a lot of changes. Sometimes it leads to a purge of personnel. Other times it leads to down.
But you took it in stride.
Well, I didn't have any choice. Or what,
Yes.
and I sort of knew it was coming for a couple of years. I was surprised it lasted as long as it did. Again, I don't think there was any need to perpetuate the name. I mean, the fact it was called Tal's Hill, one of that was just it stands by chance. The architects on the drawings after I first proposed this as a possible idea on the drawings where they had the incline for the lack of some other term, they just put Tal's Hill. So in our meetings, that's what it would be referred to by the architects and our key management staff, Drayton and others, and that just sort of carried over. It wasn't necessarily named in honor of somebody. It was just the fact they wanted somebody to blame if they didn't like it.
I have a question. Being from Massachusetts, did you ever have any interaction with the Cape Cod League?
When after I started working on baseball, particularly in Houston, and one out of standing on the All-Star break or something like that, you always try to get away for a few days. And if I was looking for a retreat, the first place that came to mind for a short visit would always be Cape Cod because it was so dear to me. And I can recall going there to see Bobby Valentine when he was the only high school player in the Cape League that year, I believe, out of Stamford, Connecticut. And I went to see Valentine. The Astros. I saw another player that we actually drafted as a result of that, an outfielder named Glenn Adams. I don't know whether that's a familiar name or not. Glenn had. I'm not even sure Glenn got any playing time in Houston, but he did with Sam with the Minnesota Twins later on. He had a brief, I should say a brief. I'll have to look it up. He certainly had a couple hundred at bats in the big leagues.
Thank you.
Maybe time for one more question, Monty.
Yeah, Tal, thanks for joining us. Hey, back to labor relations. Do you have any anecdotes and/or observations about Marvin Miller?
No anecdotes. My relationship with him was never in a setting where it would become casual or jovial or anything of that nature. It wasn't that kind of. But later on, dealing with Gene Orza and Mark Langer when he was a figure in the Players Association, that was a lot different. Would do salary arbitration cases. Obviously, you do your best to present your case and your argument, and after it's over, would walk out together and discuss the case and laugh about it, and when or LA or on the road someplace, really staying in the same hotel, and sometimes you'd see him at lunch or join him for a beer or of that nature. That was never the situation with Marvin Miller. I got to know Dick Moss quite well in later years, but that was after he left the Players Association. So I really don't have any stories about Mark. We didn't have that kind of a relationship as I did on with the others that I.
Well, Tal, thank you so much for spending time with us today and for joining us, from the very beginning. You're certainly welcome to stick around for the rest of the day as well. We have some terrific presentations coming up, but I just want to thank you so much for sharing your insight, for sharing some stories, and especially talking a little bit about Bill Gilbert was really special for us to hear. And we could do this all day. I mean, there are so many questions I could have asked you about the 1980s Astros, about the previous golden eras of the Astros, and talk about stadiums. I mean, there's just so much that you've done in baseball that this has been a real treat for us. And I'm so glad, wish we could have done this in person, but so glad that we had you on today. I just want to thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you, Gilbert. I have really enjoyed this. I particularly enjoy the participation by those of you in attendance. As I said, that's one of the things I really treasure about SABR, the relationships and the mutual interest we have in the game. And I've really enjoyed this. I hope it wasn't too wordy or verbose some of the answers. And but it's always fun to address and talk about these things. I look
Yeah.
forward to we can do it live and
Yeah, I look forward to that. We would love to have you back again. You know, there's so much to explore and to talk about. So thank you so much again. Really, really appreciate that.
okay, good. I'm going to mute this, but I'm going to try to listen to the rest of the proceeding.
All right, very good. Thank you so much.